Today's roster review is for Anabolie, aka Fatso, in game. Much smaller player than my typical patrons, but I'm excited to see where you're at and see what kind of pointers I might be able to give you to help you kind of grow on your way and get those early milestones out of the way. So only 2.1 mil, which isn't bad. You're taking decent spots in your fleet arena. Your regular arena, if you can come up with viable counters to what's in front of you, is really going to help fuel your growth. I don't know how heavy of a pay-to-play player that you are, but if you do put money into the game, obviously at an early stage like you are now, it's going to help you a lot be able to overcome and climb to the top of your arena. Likewise, the Hyperdrive bundle, if you haven't gotten it already, is a fantastic value for an early game player. At a low GP, even at a high GP, there's a ton of gear in there that is well worth the value in and of itself, but it also does speed up shard farming. So if that's within your means, I would highly recommend it as a way of speeding things along. You do have your Darth Revan. I can see you got a Relic Grandmaster Yoda and your Jedi Knight Anakin. So you're slowly getting the pieces of the top squads, which are going to be your Sith Empire, your Jedi Knight Revan Jedi Squad, and your Galactic Republic Padme Squad. Those are the ones you want to focus on. Once you get the top kind of meta teams down, the rest you can kind of fall into place as you start working on like Night Sisters, First Order, Resistance, and eventually those two will be useful for Galactic Legends. But at your level right now, it's a lot more beneficial to you to be getting these other top counter squads that are used in several other counters out of the way. Your Gas, your Padme, and keep working on things like Trey and whatnot. So we're going to go ahead and go through each faction, kind of see where you're at, see what needs a little bit of work, and see what things you should kind of skip over at this GP level that you can circle back around to later. You don't have to skip it permanently, but there's a lot of things that will help you now that you don't need to work on as far as the early game. You know, it's not going to do you any good to work on, say, Imperial Troopers at the moment or Jawas as an example. So let's set it to speed because you definitely want to focus on speed. If you're not already doing so, you want to be farming mods as much as your energy refreshes allow. I'd recommend at least 3 times your 50 crystal refresh. If you can do your 100 crystal refreshes as well, that's going to be a huge boost to you all throughout the game and later on, because you're going to want a lot of those high speed mods, and they are difficult to come by. It's unfortunately something that only takes time and time of farming mods and rolling and getting lucky to get those high speed mods that everybody needs for a lot of the top end squads. So characters and metas will come and go and may fade into the background as their usefulness is done, but mods can always be switched around. So that'd probably be the primary piece of advice that I would give you, is to focus a lot on mods, because you can't take gear off of a character once their meta is passed, but you can take their mods off and repurpose them to another squad. So let's take a look at each of your factions and go from there. Start off, you don't have Galactic Legends. Let's just check real quick. 501st is something you're going to need eventually for gas and also for cam shards. Whenever you're in a position to be able to do that, you're going to need all your 501st, and unfortunately they're all going to have to be relicked up. Even at Relic 7, there's a high chance of failure, but it does make the squad itself pretty solid, and gas is an important squad and is used in other counter squads. So having a full Relic 7 gas team with Relic 7 clones definitely will not hurt you, and they're going to be a solid squad to have in Grand Arena to put down on defense or cut through anything your opponent sets down on offense. Definitely something you want to work on, but they are kind of a long-term project. It's going to take a while to get them all relicked up where they need to be. Right now, you've got them low gear. Looks like you're still working on the star for Arc Trooper, which is fine. Eventually, they will need all their Zetas and all their relics, but they will serve you well. Taking a look at your bounty hunters. Right now, you might need them for, the Chewie event, and I would suggest taking 5 and only pick 5 bounty hunters that you're going to be able to work on, because if you start working on more than that, it's not worth you trying to field 2 bounty hunter squads, and some of them are not useful hardly at all in the later game unless you just crazy invest them all the way to the top. So like IG-88, I really wouldn't put any work into him because he's so squishy that he dies fairly easily. I remember when I unlocked Chewie, I think I did have IG-88, and that was because I did not have my Dengar start up. Like, you don't have yours start up all the way yet. So I didn't have it, and I was kind of forced to use him, but it makes it much more difficult. And really the only thing IG-88 is used for is the Grievous nuke team counter to Darth Revan. So if you don't run that, he's really pretty useless elsewhere because he's just so squishy. He can be taken out very, very easily. So if I had to pick 5, I'd recommend obviously Bosk, Jango, Boba as your top 3. And then if you're not a heavy pay-to-play where you're in a position to star up Mando and Greef, that would be the ideal 4th and 5th, because as new characters and new bounty hunters, they're going to be useful for a good while. But if you don't have them, then solid ones would be like Cad Bane and Dengar. I even use my Dengar still, and he's only gear 12, and everybody else is relicked up. But since he goes under stealth a lot, he is super useful in a squad because he can't be touched until the very end, usually anyway. So I would keep starring up Dengar. You don't really have to invest too many resources into Greedo because he's not very useful. If you want him in a primary squad, he's got some uses on the side for different things here or there, and people put him in odd 3 versus 3 comps. But in general, he's not very useful. I think my own is still ultra low gear, kind of like yours, because I just don't use him. Cad Bane is really nice because of the stuns that he can do, and just being able to get in there and kind of control the situation. He's got the double tap attacks, which are nice. So he would be one useful to gear up if you're not planning on doing like Mando or Greef. Maybe you want to pick Cad and Dengar. Give it some thought, but I would only focus your energies on 5 of them, getting them up to at least gear 12, and then you'd have a solid squad for use in everything. Whether your guild uses them in, territory wars, or you're putting them down in Grand Arena, you want 5 solid characters, and you don't want to waste your resources getting, 8 of them to gear 8. That's not going to help you. But if you can get them all up, the ones you're going to use, to 12, that's going to do a lot more for you than having some other ones that you only use every once in a great while. And you want your boss to be nice and fast, heavy on the protection, tenacity if you can spare it. Boba, you'd want to have him kind of fast, a little bit potent. Keep that in mind, potency for the ability blocks. He also lands the dots. But you want some heavy damage on him because his execute can really get the job done on something like Night Sisters or on other B squads that your opponent may try to go after you with. Having a solid execute land and take somebody out is pretty satisfying. And then, of course, speed and damage on Jango as well. So that'd be my recommendations as far as your bounty hunters go. Let's take a look at... Okay, for your clones, just real quick, I mentioned the 501st already. The only other one, the Clone Sergeant, he has a ship. So if you're going to run Negotiator and you plan on using his ship as a tank, like reinforcement, then I would work on Clone Sergeant. But if not, you could just farm the Y-Wing and use that since it doesn't need a pilot and it's a tank on its own. And you can do that without having to worry about wasting extra gear on the clone sergeant. It's pretty much for those of us that already happen to have him, at gear 12. Otherwise, it will save you a good bit of gear not having to mess with him and devoting it elsewhere. And then Cody, right at this moment, you don't need to do anything with him because he really doesn't have a use these days. Even his Zeta, it's outclassed by like Shock T or even Rex. Nobody uses Cody Zeta for anything. So I wouldn't devote your energies or resources to these two if you don't have to for some reason, because there's better choices. Let's take a look at your Empire. With Thrawn, you've got him geared up the most, gear 12, and he's the fastest, which is great. You want him to be nice and fast so that he can be used to help counter those Padme squads. He can be used to help throw turn meter to a Sith team or another Empire team you might run. If he goes first, that's as good as anybody on the team going first, just because you can have him swap the turn meter and top up protection to him as well. But he's really good if you can run him nice and fast. You've got your EP up, which is solid because eventually you'll want to R7 him when you go for Supreme Leader Kylo. Doesn't have to be right away, but he is a solid character, and he at least does have some usefulness nowadays. As far as the rest of the Empire characters, I mentioned in the beginning, your Imp Troopers, you're not at the level right now where they would be any kind of useful to you. So you really don't have to worry about working on your Imp Troopers at the moment. There's better places that you can put your resources, because they do take quite a bit of gear to get them all up to where they do a significant amount of damage and can get that reliable first kill right away. And then, Tarkin, we don't use his ship nowadays. Vader, he does get used under EP. So if you plan on running an Empire type Sith hybrid team, Vader is not a bad choice because he gets a nice speed boost and he can jumpstart the turn meter train on an EP lead. But that's just something you have to consider. He's not used for much of anything else as far as top squads go. So you have to consider whether or not it'd be worth it to you. Let's move on. Just real quick, looking at your Ewoks. So you're going to need to put some work into them for C-3PO. And the ones that you're going to end up using, if you do the standard comp, is Wicket, and then Elder, Paplu, Chirpa, and I see you don't have him yet, but Logray. You're going to need him for the days that he offers. You can do it without, but it's harder. Basically, you need to add more gear to your squad or be okay with retrying it a whole bunch of times for not having them. It's like it's pretty much meant that you're supposed to use those 3 newest Ewoks plus Elder and Chirpa, and you would need the Zeta on Chief Chirpa to even have a shot at it. So when you're ready for him down the line, you'd have to gear them all up to a minimum of gear 9. I think that was the lowest that I saw him succeed, but probably more gear if you're going to use characters that aren't the main ones, especially if you plan on not using Wicket or something. Tebow and Scout are the 2 most useless ones. They're not used at anything all in the later game, so any kind of gear and resources you invest into those 2 are pretty much going to be just wasted and sit there on characters that you never use. So you want to be able to gear them up just enough of only the ones that you're going to use, and then get your C-3PO, and then you won't touch your Ewoks again because they really don't get used for much of anything else. So you don't want to waste any more gear than you have to. Let's move on to your First Order. First Order is going to be kind of a long-term project. For that, you have to relic everyone up anyway to get to Supreme Leader Kylo Ren. But if you want to do a basic First Order squad to start, then you would do something like Crew, Kylo Ren Unmasked Lead, and then regular Kylo Ren. You would use Executioner, and then maybe you would use Hux or First Order Officer. I would suggest Hux at this point, just because he brings a little bit more to the table. And then First Order Stormtrooper. And that's pretty much the basic team that you'll use all the way through until you unlock Supreme Leader Kylo Ren and start running different combinations with him. So something to think about, but they are still kind of a long way off. Again, I wouldn't recommend, devoting resources to these guys unless you just want them as a B team for Grand Arena, because there's other squads that you can start working on, your top squads, and get more value out of them instead. Let's take a look at that Galactic Republic that you're working on. Got your Anakin up, obviously, because he's got his ship. You've got your Padme. You'll want to give her other Zeta too. You've got R2. He's pretty solid, being the fact that he can share his stats with the rest of the squad. You'll want to give him both of his Zetas whenever you get the chance. But first and foremost would be the number crunch, so that he can share those stats with everybody. Because that's a huge boost to your squad. If you're having trouble, he can kind of boost them up, strengthen them a little bit, make them that much stronger. So good that you have him. Consider adding his Zetas. You'll definitely want Padme's other Zeta. You've got GK. You're working on starring him up. That's great. He's going to be a solid tank, and he has been ever since he came out in the tank raid. He's very useful as a plug-and-play character and can be put in a wide variety of squads. So any resources you put on him are definitely not going to be wasted. And the fact that he has the ship, the capital ship negotiator, taking him all the way up to Relic 7 is going to be a good thing in the end. So whenever you can finish starring him up and then gear him up as fast as you can to at least 12, he's going to do a whole lot for you. But the faster you can get him reliced up and ready, he's going to be a really solid tank that your opponents are going to have trouble getting through. Very, very good character. And I would just focus on the main ones. It's going to be Padme, Anakin, GK, Ahsoka. You're going to have to do Shaak Ti eventually. And then you have R2 in there. Eventually, you might sub him out with C-3PO, because C-3PO runs really good in the Padme squad. But until you get him, R2 will do you just fine. And like I said, eventually you'll have to get Shaak Ti, gear her up. Her unique Zeta is especially useful. Her lead one is good only if you're going to run her with the clones, which sometimes you do. Not a lot in the end game, but it's still nice to have that option. It's definitely not going to hurt her when you have the Zetas to spare. But just something to consider, because you don't always run her lead, so you may not put that on right away, just so that you can find other places to get max usefulness out of your Zetas. Just something to keep in mind. I wouldn't devote any resources to the ones you have at the bottom, the Jedi Guardian, Clone Wars Chewie, Consular, even Plo Koon you really don't need. You need his ship, but you really just want the reinforcement bonus from that ship. You don't really need it to survive, and even at gear 12, it doesn't last that long. So as long as you can max out the reinforcement ability on it that heals everybody, you don't need to worry about gearing him up too much. I wouldn't worry about Mace. I wouldn't worry about Luminara. I already mentioned Cody. Qui-Gon I wouldn't do. So all those you can save without having to gear them up anymore. You've got Qui-Gon to gear 8, but he's not really useful in any of the other squads. Even in a Jedi squad, he's barely filler. Like if you split off a Bastila team, you're going to end up running Ezra or Barriss or Shaak Ti. You're not going to use Qui-Gon just because he's so squishy, even at gear 12, and then it takes a lot of resources to take him to gear 13. You don't want to invest those if you don't have to, and you really don't have to. So that's Galactic Republic. Taking a look at your Genosians, I noticed that, those are really good. You got them gear 12 across the board, which is really solid. You've got that unique Zeta, which is important for calling the Brute right at the start of the battle. And at your GP, a full Gear 12 Genosian squad is going to do great for you. These are one of the few squads in the game that will punch above their weight class, and so it takes a lot to be able to take them out. They can't just go in with a mediocre squad and grind down geos. You just can't do it. There's a few squads that can't be ground down like that, like you would some other normal squad. There's so much healing and so many assists and counters that this squad offers. This is only going to help you, and I don't know if it's good enough for you to be able to earn watch shards for your guild, but if it's not, just think about slowly adding relics to the alpha. The more relics you can put on alpha, the better, because he's one of the two things in the game where you get double the bang for your buck. So if you get relic 7, say on your alpha, that's going to make the brute that he summons also relic 7. So it's like a 2-for-1 special. So no relics that you put on alpha are going to be wasted. I'd recommend at least a minimum of R5 on it, and then taking it all the way up to 7 would be ideal. And then after you work on that, Spy would be your next biggest one. After you relic him up to, 4 or 5, you should be able to auto your way to a watch shard every single mission. It's not very hard. A couple relics on this squad will make it easy and get rid of all the RNG factors so that you're guaranteed to get that shard every time for your guild, and it will only strengthen your, if you do like a geo wall in territory wars, it's only going to help that. Also, putting relics on this squad will make it so that your opponent, when they try to use their Treya, has a chance of failure. Right now, more than likely their Treya team will be able to go through and beat this squad and not fail, even if Spy gets off a big hit. But once you start putting relics on them, they're going to have a risk of catching a big hit at the wrong time and failing the team. And then it's going to be real hard to get through when they don't have that triumvirate. Okay, next up, I already mentioned your Imp Troopers, but I'll just tell you right now, they're a long way off from being ready, so I wouldn't devote resources at this point because you'd still need the Zeta on Veers, and you don't even have Stark or Range ready, and those are the next two important pieces to making this squad work and making them be reliable. So any gear that you're putting into like Death and Snow and Stormtrooper, all that at this point could be done later when it's going to be more beneficial to you. Any of the gear that you were thinking about putting towards them would be better served, going toward Padme or Shakti or your clones in preparation for gas, not your Imp Troopers that are more of a later game team. Let's move on to the next one. So Jawas, yeah, don't do anything with those guys. They're not going to help you where you're at right now. So Jedi, some of those got mentioned in the Galactic Republic, but you want to focus on 5 primary ones for your Jedi Knight Revan squad, and usually that's going to be Jedi Knight Revan, Bastila Shan, your Grandmaster Yoda, which you've already gotten up there, which is great, and then you're going to want to work on your Jolee, getting him relicked up. I would say at least Relic 5 seems to be the consensus as far as a good stopping point, because he has to survive sometimes and be able to bring back the whole squad, usually against a Grievous team. So you definitely need him to not die, because he's going to be the key to that squad being successful. So he's going to be on there, Jedi Knight Revan, Bastila Yoda, and then usually the 5th is Hermit Yoda, but I don't see that you have him, and that's going to be kind of a long road because he does take the Guild event tokens, which also Wampa takes, and also General Skywalker takes, and I think Malik too. So yeah, it's a long road. You've got to share it, amongst all those, and you're working on your Malik, which is pretty important. So it's going to be a long time till you get Hermit Yoda. You probably could use, say, Old Ben, just because you already have some gear devoted to him, and the fact that he's a Jedi and a Rebel, he can get plugged into your CLS squad later when you have Commander Luke up and running with Han and them. He's definitely a good tank, and he can work as a plug and play in other squads as well. So he'd probably be a solid fifth for you in a Jedi Knight Revan team for the time being, since it's going to be a while before you get Hermit Yoda. Take a look at your Night Sisters. You don't have much work put into them, but when you do put some work into them, they are kind of a B squad. They can be used to counter some top teams, but it really just depends. When you do decide to work on them, you can take Zombie up to at least Gear 10. She needs Gear 10 to unlock the ability to be able to come back multiple times and not just die off after she gets killed off twice, I think. So there's an Omega that you have to put on once she gets to Gear 10. Besides that, you don't need to work on Talia. She really doesn't get much use. The primary ones would be Daka, Spirit, Mother Talzin, Asajj, and Zombie. So any gear that you put into them, you'd want to put amongst those five. And especially Daka is the key to this squad. Being able to, again, like Jolie, revive everybody, bring them back from the grave, and keep the squad going. You'd want your Daka to be at least Relic 5, and she does need the Zeta, because every time someone dies, she keeps gaining an increased health bonus, so she's going to eventually get so strong that she's very, very difficult to kill. And that's one of the reasons that she works as a high-end counter. So you may be a ways off from that happening, but it's something good to keep in mind, that if you're going to devote resources to the squad, you don't want to waste them on characters like Talia or Acolyte or Initiate, that you haven't even unlocked, it looks like. So just keep that in mind as you go through and you progress through the game. Let's take a look at the next one. Old Republic. You got the important ones to 12, obviously, so you can do your thing for Malik. I wouldn't say you need to do anything else here. You got Mission and Zalbar at Gear 12 with their Zetas. They're useful as a plug and play in multiple squads. You can put them as a 4th and a 5th, or you can just use Zalbar as a lone plug and play tank. He's pretty useful in that regard. You don't necessarily have to do a full Karth Old Republic squad. You can just take Zalbar and stick him in as a taunt when things get tough and one of your characters goes down to health. He'll throw up a taunt and draw their focus elsewhere. Something to think about. But I wouldn't put any more work into like Juhani or Canderous, and definitely not T3, just because they don't really have a use unless you go all the way all in and take them all to maxed relics. And even then, they're not as useful as if you put those resources on some other character that you could have gotten a better benefit from. Phoenix, you don't need to do anything here. They've got some ships, but really they take too much of a gear investment and too much of a Zeta investment, because you really do need them all for them to be any kind of useful. So I would skip over these guys. You don't really need them for anything. We don't run the Hoth TBs, so they're not very useful. Rebels, the only ones you want to focus on out of this as primary rebels would be your CLS, your Han, your Chewie, and your C-3PO when you get him. And you do have your Commander Luke working on gearing him up. He'll need his lead and then his It Binds All Things Zetas. Those are the two important ones. You don't need the other one. I think it's called Learn Control. That's kind of a luxury Zeta, but his lead and his It Binds All Things are the two important ones to making that squad run. Very, very important Zetas, so I would prioritize those. Han Solo, you want to put his Zeta on so that he gets the double tap. Having that extra attack is huge and can be make or break for removing some turn meter or getting a kill shot on a character at the right time. Definitely want to think about that Zeta. And then Chewie, I forget which Zeta it is, but one of his Zetas is still pretty important. The other one is kind of a luxury because we don't really use CLS to counter Traya squads. But if you are, then you'll want that Zeta that helps with the cooldown increases and ability blocks. That's something to think about. But his other one is the one that will help you with the healing and everything. So those are the ones to focus on. When you get C3PO, of course you'll want to start gearing him up to about gear 12. I know there's some people in my guild still that have him at 11, and since he goes in stealth a lot, like I mentioned with Dengar, you can have the characters that stealth a lot at a lower gear and they'll still be useful to you. But kind of 12 is like a solid stopping point. You really don't want to go any lower than that, since we're living in a relic world now, and them R7s will hit pretty hard. So something to consider there. As far as the other rebels, the miscellaneous ones like Lando, the Rogue One, all them, and I mentioned Phoenix, they're not going to do you any favors. I wouldn't put any resources that way. Resistance, I already mentioned R2. Since he has so many tags, Resistance, Rebel, Droid, all that stuff, he's a solid character to invest in. For Resistance, you're basically going to want your JTR. Eventually, you're going to have to get all these guys up to Relic when you go after Galactic Legend Rey. But in the meantime, the basic squad that most people use would be JTR, BB-8, R2, and then either C3PO, or he'll go with Galactic Republic, and you'd use something like Finn and Resistance Trooper. Those are the ones that people usually ran for a basic JTR squad. So something to think about there. I wouldn't worry about investing in other characters like the Han and Chewie vets or the original Poe until you're ready to really make an effort for Galactic Rey. I would just stick with your basic 5 and kind of build from there. That way you don't have to use as many resources. Rogue One, I already mentioned those. Don't really work on them because you don't use them for anything nowadays. So all the gear sitting on them is just wasted that would be better spent elsewhere. Scoundrel, a lot of that's Bounty Hunter. We'll skip back around till it hits Smuggler and go from there. But taking a look at Separatists, I already mentioned your Geos are in really good shape. The next squad you'd work on out of these guys, of course, would be your Grievous Droid squad. And you will end up using, some of them to get gas. So one of the things you can do here is you'll want them at relics, okay, but your B1 actually works pretty well at lower stars. A lot of us used him when we were farming him at 3 and 4 stars, because the only thing the stars are going to do is his offense, really. He can still be a major pain if you throw the Zeta on him, because it all involves the stacks that he gets. And you still can only add on extra stacks with a Zeta and then only take off a certain amount. It's like, isn't it 7 every time you hit him? So he's still going to be tough to take out, even at a lower gear and lower star level. He just does less damage. But when he goes to do his move where he can heal up, he still heals a good amount on your B2 or on your Grievous or whoever needs it. So definitely a character that at your GP you would get a lot of use out of is that B1 battle droid. Definitely consider putting a little bit of work into him and adding that Zeta on there, because he's just going to be pretty annoying for your opponents to have to take out. So there you go for Separatists. Let's move on to your Sith, which you're doing good as far as the Sith Empire goes. Your basic Sith, I already mentioned EP and then possibly Vader. The main ones out of this category would be the Triumvirate. So it's going to be Traya, Scion, and Nihilus. And right now you don't have Scion, so your Triumvirate's going to take a bit of work, because they really do all three need to be together. They all kind of feed off each other and give bonuses to each other. So when you're ready, it's worth putting work into them, but you still have a while to go. Seeing that your Traya is only 5 stars, it's going to take some work to finish getting her started up. But in the meantime, you have your Sith Empire. And obviously those are much stronger than the Treyas squad, since we don't even use that in Arena anymore. So definitely keep putting work into your Sith Empire. Let's go over there. You've got right now 4 solid Sith Empire characters, and that does hurt you a little bit because when you put in a 5th, like in your Arena, you lose out on the Sith Empire bonus of having the whole team Sith Empire. So that's kind of hurting you in a way. I would recommend getting one of the other characters. Probably at your level, I would say Trooper would be more beneficial to you. The Sith Empire Trooper, that's just the tank. You'd want to get him. And even at a low star, he was pretty useful. Gear him up as high as you can, to 11 or whatever, and throw on full protection defense mods. And that way he's still tough to take out. His main job is going to be a pre-taunt, being able to take a pre-taunt from other Darth Revan teams so that they can't fear your whole team. And then the fact that he passively taunts and will taunt whenever someone on your team uses a special, you don't have to actively taunt with him to get his usefulness. So he's going to be a lot better for you than either Marauder or Assassin will be, although Marauder is pretty useful in a Sith Empire team if you know what you're doing and have good speeds on them. Especially if you use them on offense, Marauder can put in some work. But if you had to choose, because it's limited resources, Trooper is going to be a lot more beneficial and be a plug-and-play character elsewhere if you don't need a full 5. Like, for example, the 3v3s that we're running currently for GAC, you wouldn't need 5 there. So he could be a useful pre-taunt tank elsewhere. And he's pretty solid at gear 12. He'd be good at gear 11 even with low stars. But then once you do star him all the way up, you could leave him at 12 and he would still get the job done quite well. So that would be a big recommendation to you there, is to get that, and then you're not sacrificing your Sith Empire bonuses for running a full Sith Empire team as well. Just something to consider. That way you're not stuck with only 4 and having to throw Thrawn or Alpha or somebody else in as the 5th and compromise that squad. Let's move on to your pretty much the last thing you need for ground is your smugglers. And the important one out of there is Nest. You've already got her up to 12 with the Zeta, which is great. She's a great character as a plug-and-play character, I'm sure you know. Can be used to solo squads just by herself or under a low-geared Kira as a leadership, just because the leadership is important. You can use her that way. But you would want to consider putting some relics on her. Just more survivability and more damage. That way the damage will ramp up that much quicker. Just because she's got her bonuses. Once you take her to, I would say a lot of people are taking her to at least Relic 3. I would say, again, 5 is kind of my stopping point on a lot of things. But personally, I did take my own Nest to Relic 7. And I think that she's well worth the investment. She can handle a lot of squads solo if you know what you're doing. And she can be a good stopping block to people using standard counters on a lot of your other squads. If you throw her on a Night Sister team or on a, people do use her on a Scoundrels team, or will use her as an extra 5th on a Bosk Bounty Hunter team with Nest. Just something to consider, getting her relicked up as one of the characters, because she can put in so much work once she has those relics and can do more damage and has that extra survivability. For the vets, you really only need to work with them once they, once you're ready to go for Galactic Legends, then start working on them. Until then, they're going to be just fine where they're at like gear 8. You don't use them for anything, really. And the only reason to gear them up for Galactic Legends is just because you have to. They really don't get used for anything. And I wouldn't worry about the characters that you obviously don't have unlocked yet, like Young Han, Young Lando. Those characters aren't going to do anything for you. So that's it for your ground squads, obviously, because you don't need to work on Tuscans. Nothing there. Let's flip over to your ships, but you're already doing really good. Getting rank 1 in arena. It looks like you are working on the Y-Wing. And like I mentioned earlier in the video, that would be my suggestion. Instead of wasting gear on Clone Sergeant, since you don't have him all the way maxed out already, this Y-Wing is a good replacement as a solid tank. I would just use that ship instead and not have to worry about gearing up a separate pilot since you have so many other ground characters that could use the resources. Keep working on your Galactic Republic there. That way you can run the negotiator fleet whenever you have your 7-star negotiator. Looks like you still don't have the capital ship. You know, you've got just your basics, Mace, Tarkin, Thrawn, Akbar. But eventually keep, saving up your guild event tokens, the level 2 ones, and go all in on your negotiator. Get that unlocked, and that way you can start running that Galactic Republic fleet, and you'll be able to counter anything. Once you have the negotiator unlocked, I mean, you can beat everything with it. I routinely save mine for offense just because I know I'm going to be able to beat every single fleet that my opponent puts down pretty much, and it makes climbing to rank 1 in arena a breeze. So you'll see people with malevolence and all that, and that's fine, but negotiator can still take them out and get you to that rank 1. So keep focusing on getting those shards, working towards your unlock. Even at 5 stars, it's going to be doing solid work for you. So be looking forward to that. And keep working on that Y-Wing. You're doing really good there. As long as you can keep taking rank 1 in your fleet arena, those extra crystals are going to help fuel your growth. And if you can start doing that in regular arena, you're just going to grow that much faster as well. So hopefully this was helpful and showed you kind of where to put resources and where not to put resources. And I'm glad to have you as a patron. I know you can reach out to me anytime, either through the patron chat on Discord, or you can send me a private message. Feel free to message me if you have any questions on this roster review, or you're curious about why I recommended something, or just anything at all. Please holler at me and I'll be glad to work with you on whatever squads or anything that you might need some help on. All right, thanks again.